Okay. First of all, thanks for taking your time out of your schedule today to talk with us about science, nanotechnology. I know you're very much involved with the educational side also with your teaching, and you have a very in-depth background in nanoscience. What I really want to do is introduce yourself, talk a little about yourself, and we'll have some discussion dialogues towards the middle about the technology and see, basically a presentation of what this field's about and what's the future for nanoscience.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm obviously Professor David Rivkin. I teach primarily here at Ohalo College in Israel, but I've recently joined CU as a member of the faculty here. And I'm actually a second-generation environmentalist, I like to say. My dad was a political scientist. He was a professor at a college in Connecticut. And back in the 1970s, he took a look at how things were being done in terms of recycling in the United States and low recycling rates. And he was actually the first to develop the concept and an actual program for what we now call curbside recycling. So that's sort of one of the contributions he's made. And my mom is actually a professor of chemistry. She's been a chemist, she's been a teacher, now she's a professor as well. So that's where I sort of got a lot of my early lessons, you might say. I attended University of California at Berkeley, obviously a very pro-environmental kind of place. And originally I was looking at getting into pharmaceutical design, but along the way I learned a lot about issues related to pharmaceuticals and how they work. Was fortunate to be picked up by a senior faculty who was working basically in the field of mimicking nature in terms of production of energy and learning from how nature works. Obviously leaves, the most basic. And that's where I really went off in that direction and have really enjoyed working in the field. I've worked in industry, and I was actually recruited into teaching in my first teaching position because of my industry experience. So I like schools especially that are very practical, that teach students to really go out there and actually practice, not just work in the theory, obviously understand the theory so that you can get things done, but combine a little bit of business, a little bit of science, make these things happen so that life's better for everyone. Okay.
Well, it's actually very interesting. Dr. Osmeri, Chancellor at Chiist University, and I was speaking about nanoscience probably for over a year now. And the plan for the future is to have a department by itself with nanoscience, but such a broad topic in several fields that ties into, especially for renewable energy. So we're excited to have you on board to class with us. We appreciate you.
Oh boy.
Sorry. Technology through learning and culture there. So, can you tell us a little bit about nanoscience, what it actually involves? Some of our students are first-year students and just getting started, and can you basically go over some of the basic concepts of nanoscience and what fields is it tied into?
Sure. Well, I really like the fact that there's so much nanoscience, nanotechnology in renewable energy. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. Basically, nanotechnology really has been around since long before human beings. Birds use nanotechnology to make the beautiful colors in their feathers, for example. When you have a fire like of wood or something, you actually get a lot of nanoparticles produced from that. And human beings have been using nanomaterials for millennium and not really knowing it. One of the very first products we commonly call carbon black. It's used in tons of industrial processes and has for years. It goes into your tires. But one of the earliest uses was actually something called India ink. It was the very first inks that were ever used for drawing on papyrus and things like that. And that's just carbon black dissolved in some water. It's really not terribly sophisticated, but it has some interesting properties in terms of how it absorbs light. That's why it is so black. So we've learned a lot from that, and that we actually apply in the renewable energy field. We also use nanotechnology in a lot of structural materials today, and this is something that's relatively new that we discovered. There's naturally occurring materials that are basically clays. They're very, very fine clays, so they're called nanoclay. And they're actually used extensively in the automotive industry, and especially in big trucks and the plastic panels, to strengthen the plastic. And that kind of technology is going into wind turbine blades today. So that's something that's advancing very quickly. And that's very important. There's a lot of structural materials, obviously carbon fibers, graphenes are now being explored for using in both electronic aspects of renewable energy, but also structural materials. And a lot of people don't realize how much structural aspects there are in nanoscience and their applications to the very large things like wind turbine blades. But one of the areas that people think about a lot is in terms of energy, especially absorbing light. Light happens to be the same wavelengths as these nanoparticles, and that's why they're so important to us. They absorb the energy at different wavelengths depending upon what the materials are. We're designing materials today that absorb very broad spectrums of light to absorb as much energy from the sun as we can. We're also looking at things like absorbing heat from materials and making the heat flow in one direction and not flow backwards, so we have control over it. Which is very helpful for us in a lot of thermal processes. So there's a lot of really exciting things going on in the industry. Now,
well, what would you say would be your specialty, David, as far as nanoscience and nanotechnology? I know there's two terms that are thrown out there, nanoscience and nanotechnology. Would you say yours falls into nanotechnology?
Everybody defines the line somewhere differently, unfortunately. My area is in the looking at nature and how the small molecular structures, they're usually very large molecules, but they're small on our scale, and what we can learn from them, especially in terms of absorbing energy, maybe transforming energy. I've done projects where we've actually converted ultraviolet light to something that a photocell can absorb much better and doesn't damage the photovoltaic cell, for example. So that's my main area. Also, I work a lot on the thermal materials. And the thermal materials are quite interesting because they're actually derived from what we use every day in paint. They're titanium dioxide or zinc oxide, which is what we use for sunscreen. We've been, again, using zinc oxide for many millennium as a sunscreen. And now we're learning how powerful that really is for and very safe. The titanium dioxide, unfortunately, is a little more complicated. But zinc oxide seems very safe, and we're able to absorb energy from that, whether it's light or whether it's heat. So even simple things like new paints that have recently come on the market that reflect the heat off of your house. It's just regular paint. You don't have to do anything fancy. It doesn't cost much more than ordinary paint, everyday paint. So those are certainly very interesting things within the science and the field, and that's something that interests me.
Well, what do you think, students coming through, first-year student, obviously, nanoscience involves some math and science background to get to the level of understand technology. What do you recommend for our students, courses for our students to take to prepare themselves for this field of study?
Well, the physics is important, the mathematics, like you mentioned, and laboratory-type chemistry. Now, the laboratory chemistry, surprisingly, a lot of the things I do don't look much different than my wife making a pot of soup. The temperatures are about the same, it cooks for a long time. There's just a few funny things I do at the end. There are actually very, very practical things you can do. You don't need a super sophisticated laboratory to do a lot of interesting things within the field now. So things are not scary. They don't have to be scary to a student. The physics is not super far out astrophysics or anything like that. Yes, there's a little bit of understanding about quantum mechanics and some basics, but they're not much more above the high school level of most people in the United States or in most other countries. These are things that can be learned actually simultaneously while they take this class. and again, the focus of the class that we've designed is really to be very, very practical, to really show you about how it works on an industrial scale. And the industrial scale may be, in your backyard, but it's something that is very practical to do. So how the chemistry works, it's pretty simple. The physics is relatively simple. It's something that we can relate to, especially I would say that students that I've had from places like Kenya before, or South Africa, where I've lived, they're exposed to nature so much more than a lot of Americans are, and that's actually an advantage. There's so much we can see and learn from just playing in our backyard, and observing how nature works every day. And that's the greatest scientific laboratory, obviously, that exists.
Yeah.
So we try to always relate things to what you would see in nature, what you would do in your everyday life. And I think that that's a real difference that, especially the CU mission, really has of being practical, being able to interface with students who maybe didn't have quite as much formal education as someone from Europe or North America might have had.
Right.
But we can relate this. You can come up to speed very, very quickly on these concepts and put them to use. Now, where I work right now, my main college, one of our missions is to connect the industrialized world to the developing world, and really learn from both. There is so much that we're learning from, especially from Africa, because we're very close to Africa, or from the Middle East. Obviously, we're in the middle of the Middle East. And we're doing things like looking at things that people in Africa do every day, which is recycle everything. Well, one experiment that we're doing is actually taking some of the paint that I mentioned just recently and applying it to salvaged materials like an old satellite dish. An old satellite dish is a parabolic reflector, so it makes a great solar concentrator. You can use a glass bottle and an old piece of copper or steel pipe and make a little bit of a vacuum in between the two, and you get a vacuum insulated solar heater. So put the two together, you can get quite a lot of heat out of that thing, and even make steam and different processes. So it's kind of interesting. So we're learning from Africa, we're learning from the developed world as well, bringing the two together so they learn from each other. And I think that's really, really neat about CU. I think that's a really important aspect of what we're doing. And I think that's going to relate to a lot more students all around the world and make a much bigger change than a conventional kind of education, really.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time, Dave. I know you're a busy person, and trying to get an interview with you, especially just as us, where you're at now here. Sometimes it's internet connectivity problems, but seem to be good this morning. So. Do you have any closing thoughts, things you might like to discuss for some of our upcoming students with the CU?
Well, the main thing that I really want to encourage potential students is not to be afraid of the topic at all. I mean, it may sound scary when you read about it on the internet or you pick up a textbook, but we're really going to translate that into things that you can relate to. And it's not scary. It's things that you're going to be able to apply in your community, across Africa, around the world, and we really look forward to working with you and really, learning as well.
Well, David, thanks for your time. It's a true pleasure to be able to speak with you, and we really look forward to working with you in Chiist University and expanding our programs into nanoscience. It really is the field of the future. And I think, with renewable energy, it's a very important topic to discuss and to integrate into our school.
Definitely.
Thanks for your time, and